Are they your twin flame, or is it a trauma bond? This is a complex and controversial issue with serious implications for your spirituality and your personal mental health, which is why I've gone into the library and drawn out 4 books for us to learn from, including the Bible and the Quran, as well as a history of the New Age movement and some work on romantic psychology, projection, love, and limerence to hopefully have a wide-ranging, multidisciplinary, and fundamentally grounded adult conversation which has the space for the facts, the space for the feelings, and enough maturity to discuss the uncertain and often ambiguous emotional, objective reality blending, fantasy distorting territory in between the facts and the feelings. Today we're going to be exploring the twin flame phenomena in a very grounded way, or as grounded as I can possibly make it, while still leaving room for your own decision making, to not give you a yes, twin flames do exist, or no, they definitely don't exist, or get hyper dogmatic in either direction, but to lean into both spirituality and trauma psychology and try and find some genuine clarity. Because I've got the following question that I need to respond to. Bringing it up on the screen, I was wondering if you've heard of the twin flame material going around on the internet. Mentally and emotionally, I've become acutely distressed about my belief in twin flames, and whether or not it is some sort of delusion or psychosis to be feeling like my ex-partner and I are on a twin flame journey. I'm wondering if you know anything in relation to this. I could really use a grounded voice of reason at this moment in time. It's a truly tragic and sad situation, and quick, transparent moment. I've been asked about twin flames, or to do a video on twin flames, consistently for the last 2 years, and this is my very first video on the topic, because although I've dealt with the issue in private client sessions, there's been a handful of individuals I've worked with who are either in the middle of the so-called twin flame journey or reflecting on a false twin flame narrative and a variety of particularities in between. I've hesitated so strongly to make a twin flame psychology video in particular because of the burning garbage fire which is the internet discussion around twin flame material. It is rootless and ungrounded and often massively destabilizing for somebody who's realistically going through a bit of a trauma repetition, not to say there isn't truth potentially in regards to divine connection, because the overall conversation, before we go into all of this literature around how did we get here and why is it that the twin flame material was only really something that came out in the late 1980s and we have to do kind of selective reinterpretations of Abrahamic traditions to even get any grounding, the main issue with this space, and this is the fundamental foundation before we go any further, is that the twin flame conversations on the internet are selectively interpreting based on fantasy desires, because we all desire divine connection in love. And I don't want you to feel like you've sacrificed enchantment and romance and deep spiritual connection with your partner, especially with your husband or your wife, if you're going to make a family, if you're in a lifelong partnership. I want you to feel like there's a genuine soulful union between you and your life partner. It's something that we all desire. Why would you want to be in a marriage if you don't feel like the spiritual aspect of your identity is nourished and fulfilled and met with equal and arguably greater force because the two of you come together? That's a very normal thing to want if you're really being honest with yourself. But what tends to happen is that the spiritual and the personal, or the collective spiritual idea, or the I and self romantic union idea with a bit of a spiritual undertone, gets lost in a deeper conversation about unresolved romantic projection and fantasy, or just straight up misinterpretation of original sources. Let's start with surah from the Quran, and I did some research before this video to find what I believe to be some of the most accurate potential confirmations of twin flame union in the Abrahamic texts. I know there's many religions around the world, but what I believe from the 7th surah of the Quran, these particular lines are probably the closest, and again, it's English. I don't speak Arabic, so it's an English translation of Arabic, but quoting from the book, the line 189 in the 7th surah, the heights, He is the one who created you from a single soul, then from it made its spouse, so he may find comfort in her. And this is alluding, to my understanding, to the Adam and Eve story, and it goes on and talks about marriage and children. But that first line right there, God created you from a single soul. Allah created you from a single soul. That seems like a pretty strong confirmation of the twin flame idea, that initially, at some point in time, maybe a past life or at some otherworldly interjunction between this life and the next life, or when God was creating you in the palm of his hand, you were a single flame that split into two flames, which is why you feel like you know the other in essence, and through knowing them in essence, you know yourself in essence, and it's the most divine magical union ever. From that extract, cherry-picked out of the Quran, you would surely be in agreement, but also I'm taking it purposefully out of context, which is, if we actually continue reading the page, it clearly goes on to childbirth and marriage and more conventional themes in regards to man and woman union. And if we go into the Bible, the same exact theme comes up, I think, in Ephesians. One second, going to bring up this page. Yep, Ephesians 5:31. Quote from the Bible right now. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall be joined and faithfully devoted to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, which is actually quoting Genesis. But again, if we go a little bit further up in the same exact cherry-picked extract, which we put into articles or random YouTube videos that confirms the twin flame reality, we will see from line 28, even so, husbands should and are morally obligated to love their own wives as if they were their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own body, but instead he nourishes and protects and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. And continuing over to the next page, talking about what it means to love one's wife as if it were yourself. It's not quite twin flame material, but if you're perceiving the world looking for a confirmation bias of twin flame reality, you will go into spiritual sources, the literal primary religious sources like the Bible, the Quran, or maybe a Buddhist or a Hindu text or a Taoist text, or a rootless New Age reinterpretation of these texts, and you will find whatever you need to believe in the fantasy which you are craving. And it's a shame, because there's a deep spiritual idea here which is worth really honoring. This idea that if you do go into the more Abrahamic tradition, God has planned out your life, and your husband or your wife, the mother or the father of your children, is out there, and it's all been predestined. That's a beautiful spiritual idea. I don't know if I fully agree with that myself, but from a purely theological perspective, that might be a genuine and truthful idea for some people. But what's happening within the twin flame narrative is that we're missing the context. Most people aren't even going back into primary sources. They'll look up divine feminine or divine masculine videos on YouTube, and of course you then have testimonies of people who are usually on the younger end of their relationship. You're not seeing too many videos about twin flames from people in their 60s and their 70s after 40 years of marriage. It's often people in their 20s and their 30s after a variety of chaos, and you hear the testimonials. It's interesting where the stories are coming from, who's telling the stories, and the common themes and patterns which seem to come up again and again. But to truly understand, before we go into romantic projection or romantic psychology, and hopefully find a bit of grounding around the twin flame conversation, I want you to pay attention to what's going on in terms of the historical roots of the religious movement that we have today, which is known as New Age. Wouter Hanegraaff, in this masterful work, it's about 550 pages, charts the New Age movement from Middle Age, medieval mysticism, and kind of Hermetic alchemy, all the way through into the 18th and 19th centuries with theosophy and different movements, for example, within mesmerism and hypnotism, finally moving into the counterculture movements of the 60s, leading into the popularization of the 70s and especially the 80s with television and radio. But a key line that summarizes pretty much this entire book, in my second read of this book, I have about 50 pages of typed notes, but it all is captured basically in this one sentence. Quote from the book: all New Age trends, without exception, are intended as alternatives to currently dominant religious and cultural trends. The New Age trend is a secularized, or at the very least universalized, as in the universe becomes God, God becomes the universe, and then there's a variety of complex ideas around internal dualities and where autonomy actually lies, a strange blending between some things are completely in your control because you have free will and you can manifest, but other things are divinely ordained and they're out of your control, and there's fate and there's destiny. We don't need to go into the specifics. The key idea that I want you to focus on, and again, please pick up this book if you want to look past all of the various spiritual rabbit holes on YouTube and get to an actual grounded foundation. Understand the history of theology, understand how religious thought changes over time, and just take a step back to consider that maybe the twin flame conversation that we're seeing on YouTube right now is a rootless and ungrounded, I was going to say the word beginning with B, but it might. It's a rootless and ungrounded, dissipated version of a biblical truth or a religious truth from Islam, which is this idea of man and woman coming together to create union. And of course, no matter what your beliefs might be around various types of relationship, you can't deny that you're here listening to me because of the union of man and woman and the act of creation, which has fascinated and perpetuated humanity for tens of thousands of years. It's deeply rooted. It's within us as an archetypal reality of union, which if you go into depth psychology and you look at the archetypes in particular, you have the biologically rooted unconscious, and you have a variety of innate drives that arise from the biological unconscious and the collective unconscious, which would push us towards union in one form or another. What we're doing is we're taking the same basic building blocks and we're adding in some new modern language, or the twin flame union, the idea of soulmates. I can't go everywhere in a single video. I'm just trying to give you a wider perspective that the twin flame phenomena in particular is rootless. We can look back to primary sources, but if you don't understand what's happening in the wider New Age movement and the suffocation of God into the universe as a general trend, and you're seeing this idea that past lives and multiple reincarnations and various planetary systems where you're chasing your partner around the world is indeed the thing that's fascinating, you might actually, unfortunately, be suffering from something like love and limerence. Dorothy Tenov, who coined the term limerence originally, which relates to romantic projection and the idea that we're launching out fantasies here and there which aren't actually based in too much truth. Just please pause and consider this. Today's questioner was feeling mentally unwell because this idea of their ex being on the twin flame journey with them is clearly causing some kind of destabilized internal reality and maybe a variety of conversations or miscommunications in actual reality. Just consider that it might be limerence, because here's the checklist. Here's a list of bullet points about limerence, and it's listed as limerence has certain basic concepts, but what if we play a bit of a thought experiment? What if we take a moment to replace the word limerence with twin flames? I haven't done this yet. I'm going to do it in real time with you, and we're going to see if this bullet point, this psychological bullet point around romantic projection and romantic psychology, matches the twin flame fantasy, or the twin flame actuality on more of the unstable end of things. Quoting from the book and picking out some things from, page 24, Love and Limerence by Dorothy Tenov. Language game. I'm replacing the word limerence with twin flames. Twin flame psychology has certain basic components. Number 1, intrusive thinking about the object of your passionate desire, who is a possible sensual partner. Number 2, acute longing for reciprocation. Number 3, dependency of mood on the twin flame's actions, or more accurately, your interpretation of the twin flame's actions with respect to the probability of reciprocation. Number 4, an inability to react lovingly or limerently, but twin flamingly, so an inability to react as a twin flame to more than one person at a time. Brackets, exceptions only occur when twin flame psychology is at a low ebb, early on or in the last fading. Number 5, some fleeting and transient relief from unrequited twin flame passion through vivid imagination of action by the twin flame that means reciprocation. Going through a few more now quickly. Intensification. This is the key one. This is actually the key one. I've even highlighted it in blue on the page. Twin flame psychology. You'll see this all over the internet. Intensification through adversity. at least to a point. The classic, he's running away or she's running away, or why is my twin not accepting this twin flame journey and I'm the more spiritually developed one? There's so much here. An aching of the heart when uncertainty is strong. Buoyancy, which is a feeling of walking on air when the twin flame seems evident. A general intensity of feeling that leaves other concerns in the background. And finally, skipping a few out, a remarkable ability to emphasize what is truly admirable in your twin flame and to avoid dwelling on the negative, even to respond with a compassion to the negative and render it emotionally, if not perceptually, into another positive trait. Ain't that just the, oh no, he's only running away because he's on his own personal spiritual journey to finally become the kind of man who can spiritually hold me in our divine union. Oh no, she's only gone and cheated me again because she doesn't quite understand the depth of my own potency as the perfect divine masculine, and she needs a few more experiences with less divinely masculine individuals so she can finally put herself together. And then this various mix of aching and buoyancy and longing. It's fantasy, it's projection, it's limerence. Not all the time, however, but you need to be aware to be able to step back and go, oh, I'm actually caught in the lie once again. And going back to the beginning of the video, doesn't mean that the lie itself is not wanting a spiritual union. Spiritual union, a deep, divinely inspired connection between you and your partner is something that should be there. If it's a marriage especially, but even in the stages of making a long-term committed partnership, there should be a sense of two souls knowing each other, but you don't need to push the spectrum all the way to the extreme. Otherwise, you might be suffering from romantic inflation and psychological destabilization, and the roots of those kinds of issues usually go into unresolved childhood trauma around issues of attachment with mother, father, wider world, and personal self, belonging in relationships, belonging in the world, and belonging in your body. I have discussed these issues dozens and dozens of times across this channel. I mainly look at trauma psychology, so I can't even have the discussion around twin flame bonding and twin flame union without just being aware that this is definitely an ungrounded and destabilized place to be in. Surely there's a way for you to have meaningful connection with your partner without going down the love and limerence list of dysfunction and disrepair, because surely that's the thing. Otherwise, we're just wrapping stories around our own dysfunctions, and we're reworking and reframing cheating or avoidance or dismissal or some kind of intense, obsessive dynamic as if it were a spiritual journey. And this is a game where you need to look at something like New Age religion and Western culture to understand how certain ideas around the journey of the soul or the incarnation of the soul have been twisted and distorted since original Abrahamic texts. And if you go back even further, you'll obviously look at different religious traditions that preceded the Abrahamic texts, and you can go down all kinds of theological rabbit holes. There's no ultimate conclusion for a video like this. You're the one who's ultimately in control of your relationships. If you feel like you've got a soulmate connection, whatever that might mean for you, fantastic. But if you're sacrificing your well-being, your environment is starting to get shaky, and you're otherwise losing out in other areas of your life because of your soulmate or twin flame connection, it might not be a healthy move, and you might need to just step back and check yourself, because if you are meant to be together, surely, even if you're doing some trauma work together, I'm not saying you won't have to do relationship work, of course you will. If you're going to be in a proper conscious union, there's going to be all kinds of communication that goes on between you. There's going to be structures and rules and regulations, and there's also going to be ways that you connect in more intimate manners where you'll still have to work through old issues and learn what each other want. You have to do all of these things, but make sure it comes from a grounded, fundamentally slower place. That's the main issue with the twin flame conversation on the internet, and you also need to understand that when you're doing videos for YouTube like I'm doing in this video, there is titling, there is thumbnailing, and the main way to get people to watch longer, if I were to try and give you the optimal recipe as a YouTube twin flame creator of what do you do to keep your audience on the hook, it's to give them lots of emotional validation, to share lots of personal stories in a way that creates this, oh, they know what I'm talking about, and I feel seen, and this is a framing or a psychoeducation around an imperceptible feeling in myself. and then you latch onto it. I'm not saying that everyone who's making twin flame material on the internet is intentionally nefarious. It's just the nature of collective stories that once the story starts to build momentum, it's then easier for other people to join in, and that's also how cult mentality works overall. Not making firm judgments and not making firm placements. I've worked with several clients who've shared their experience of what they believe to be twin flame experiences at the time, and it's sensitive. It's really sensitive. I wouldn't want to shame someone because you've gone on a fantasy in one way or another, because maybe you know something that I don't know. And even my deepest unions with romantic partners or with friendships or with other aspects of the soul circle, soul community, I don't have all the answers. I'm just trying to open up the conversation. The most useful way that you could help me out is please leave a comment in the comment section and respond to other people sharing maybe their twin flame journeys and twin flame stories. So hopefully we can have an enchanted relationship with ourselves, with our partner, without going off into limerent or romantically projective territory, and we can still develop a relationship with God in ourselves, in the other, and as reflected through a variety of divinely inspired situations without launching ourselves into the clouds and not coming back down to planet Earth. Complex conversation. If you haven't seen my previous video on romantic psychology, then go join me over there. It's interestingly twinned with this video, and they both go very much hand in hand to celebrate love in its many forms and many distortions.